Welcome to Broken Hearts of Reddit. This is the story of how the happiest day of my life turned into hell. My wife cheated on me with my stepfather right at our wedding, in front of all the guests. But even that wasn't the worst part. My life with Sarah was, at least I thought, the embodiment of peace and harmony. Every day we spent together seemed woven from threads of trust, tenderness, and a subtle feeling that we were made for each other. We met 3 years ago at a charity event, which, to be honest, I only attended out of a sense of duty. Sarah, with her radiant smile and genuine laughter, instantly captivated my gaze. Her dark chocolate-colored hair, the light freckles on her nose that appeared in the summer, and those large, expressive eyes that changed from blue to gray depending on her mood, all of it drew me in like a magnet. Our relationship developed slowly, but surely. We cherished every moment spent together. Long walks in the park where we discussed everything under the sun, from global news to our most intimate childhood memories. Cozy evenings at home when I cooked my signature dinner and she read aloud from her favorite books. Spontaneous weekend trips to the lake where we simply sat on the shore, listening to the whispers of the wind. Sarah was the ideal partner, understanding, supportive, sincere. She always knew when I needed silence and when I needed her comforting words. I trusted her absolutely, completely. My heart, it seemed, had finally found its refuge. My father, Richard, had always been an example of strength and wisdom to me. He married my mother when I was just 5 years old, and had been a true stepfather to me ever since, replacing my biological father, whom I barely remembered. Richard was the pillar of our family, a man of his word, someone I could always turn to for advice. He was my mentor in business, my golf partner, and most importantly, my friend. He always supported me in all my endeavors, genuinely rejoiced in my successes, and was there during difficult times. And when I told him about Sarah, he seemed to be one of the few who immediately saw the same magic in her that I did. He welcomed her into our family with open arms, and I saw how quickly they bonded. This made me happy. I had always dreamed of a large, close-knit family, and Sarah seemed to be the missing piece of my puzzle. Wedding preparations took us almost a year. We wanted it to be a special day, memorable not only for us, but for all our loved ones. Sarah approached every detail with enthusiasm, choosing flowers, the venue, the menu. Though I tried to participate, I mostly trusted her taste and intuition. During these months, we were completely absorbed in pre-wedding hustle and bustle, and I barely noticed her occasionally leaving the house, citing meetings with florists or dress fittings. It seemed completely normal. My only goal was to make this day perfect for my future wife. However, as the coveted date approached, I began to notice subtle changes in her behavior. At first, they were small things I attributed to pre-wedding stress. She became a little more distracted, sometimes lost in thought when I spoke to her. Her laughter, which used to be so genuine and light, sometimes seemed a little more forced. When I hugged her, I felt a slight tension. A couple of times, I caught her looking at Richard, and it seemed to me there was something in her gaze I couldn't understand, a mix of admiration and something else, something elusive, that made me slightly uneasy. I quickly dismissed these thoughts, blaming my own wedding jitters. After all, Richard had always been a charismatic person, and many people felt respect and affection for him. Perhaps I was just exaggerating. But still, a feeling of slight anxiety, like a thin, almost invisible thread, began to penetrate my inner calm. One evening, at dinner, Sarah reacted strangely to my joke about our wedding night. She blushed, looked away, and quickly changed the subject. It was so unlike her. Usually, she would laugh easily at such things, even tease me back. This small incident bothered me the entire evening. I tried to find an explanation. Maybe she was just tired, or more nervous than she let on. But that feeling of dissonance, a subtle falseness, lingered. I didn't want to acknowledge it, pushing it away like an annoying fly, but it still hovered somewhere on the periphery of my consciousness. It was as if an invisible crack had begun to spread across the perfect picture of my life. The wedding day arrived. Everything was perfect. The sun shone, guests arrived, and every detail we had worked on for so long seemed to be the embodiment of our love. Sarah was dazzling. In her white dress, embroidered with the finest lace, she resembled a goddess. I could barely tear my eyes away from her. The ceremony passed in a blur. I only remember her eyes, full of tears, as we exchanged vows, her hand in mine, and that kiss which, I thought, was meant to seal our destiny forever. I was on cloud 9, completely absorbed in the moment. However, as the evening progressed, the subtle crack I tried to forget began to widen. At one point, as we danced, I felt that Sarah wasn't fully present with me. Her gaze swept across the room, as if she were looking for someone. I turned my head and saw her looking at Richard, who was talking to some of our friends. The moment their eyes met, I caught something that made me flinch. It wasn't just a glance. It was understanding. Something that was between them. Something I didn't know. I immediately dismissed the thought, scolding myself for ridiculous suspicions. After all, it's just my stepfather and my wife who get along well. What could be wrong? Later, as we were taking photos with guests, I noticed that Richard stayed close to Sarah the entire time. He adjusted her dress, whispered something in her ear, and she laughed in response. Their closeness, which I had previously seen as simply a display of family warmth, now began to seem a little excessive. I decided I needed a distraction. I took a glass of champagne and approached one of my old friends to chat. But my eyes still involuntarily returned to Sarah and Richard. They were sitting at the same table, leaning towards each other. I saw her touch his hand when he said something to her, and how he covered her hand with his. My heart tightened. I felt a cold, sticky anxiety beginning to engulf me. And then there was one moment that truly struck me. My mother, who had been observing everything from a distance, approached me. Her face was pale, and her eyes were full of worry. She gently took my hand and quietly said, "Daniel, I've wanted to tell you for a long time, but I didn't know how." At that moment, Sarah and Richard stood up from the table to go to the dance floor. My mother, seeing them, paused, looked away, and squeezing my hand, quickly left without finishing her sentence. I stood there completely bewildered, trying to understand what she wanted to tell me. Something was wrong. I felt it in my gut. It wasn't just a mother's concern for her son. It was something deeply personal, something she had been hiding, and that seemed to torment her. I decided to talk to her later, when things calmed down a bit. But that conversation never happened. The wedding continued, and I, trying to cope with the rising tension, tried to appear like the happiest groom in the world. I laughed, raised toasts, danced with friends, but inside, everything was screaming. I felt like I was looking at a perfect picture, but behind its canvas, something rotten and dark was hidden. I started to notice that Sarah carefully avoided looking me in the eyes, and when our gazes did meet, I saw something in her eyes that I had never noticed before: fear and guilt. I couldn't bear this internal torment any longer. The moment came when I decided I had to find out what was happening and put an end to this agonizing state of uncertainty. About an hour before the end of the celebration, as guests began to disperse and those who remained relaxed, I decided it was our moment. My friends, a few relatives who knew about our surprise, and I gathered in a dark room to surprise Sarah. The idea was that after we left the hall, she would think we had gone for our first wedding night, and then we would all re-enter the hall through another entrance and sing her favorite song. Everything went according to plan. Laughing and whispering, we crept into the dimly lit room that led to the banquet hall. We stood, hidden behind heavy velvet curtains, and waited. I heard Sarah talking to someone in the hall. I recognized the voice. It was Richard. "Daniel's gone," she whispered. I felt my heart clench. I didn't want to believe this was happening. "Now we're alone," Richard replied. His voice was low, insinuating, and it lacked the familial warmth I was used to hearing. There was a certain intimacy in it, and something else I couldn't comprehend. I heard him approach her. She didn't pull away, didn't say anything. I heard their breathing. It was close. I felt cold sweat trickle down my back. My hands trembled. I stood there in the darkness, waiting for what I hoped would never happen. But it did. First, I heard Sarah's faint sob, then her ragged breathing, then Richard's voice, which grew even softer, and finally, silence. A heavy, sticky, tense silence. And then I heard a rustle, as if the fabric of her wedding dress was brushing against something. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed the curtain aside. What I saw remained etched in my memory forever. I saw them. He had his back to us, and she was hugging him, and she was kissing him, right on the lips. My friends and relatives who stood beside me saw it too. I heard them gasp, heard one of the bridesmaids cover her mouth to stifle a cry. My mother, she stood beside me, and, seeing it, fell to her knees, covering her face with her hands. She was crying. Now, I understood what she had tried to tell me. She knew. She had known all along. Silence fell, a heavy, deafening silence. All my friends, relatives, everyone who was with me in that room stood frozen. I didn't hear their whispers, didn't see their faces. I only saw them, Sarah and Richard. She was still hugging him, her head resting on his chest. He whispered something in her ear, and she laughed. I couldn't bear it. I stepped out of the shadows, and my first instinct was to scream at them to stop. But my voice failed me. I just stood and stared at them, unable to tear my eyes away. Sarah was the first to notice me. She slowly lifted her head, and her eyes, always so full of love and tenderness, suddenly became empty and cold. She recoiled from Richard, as if I were a ghost. Richard turned, and his eyes, usually warm and full of life, were filled with horror and fear. He looked at me, and I saw a whole spectrum of emotions flash through his eyes. Shame, guilt, despair. "Daniel," Sarah whispered. Her voice trembled. "It's not what you think." Not what I think. I finally found my voice, and it was alien. "I just saw you kissing my stepfather at our wedding, in your wedding dress, and it's not what I think." Richard took a step forward. "Daniel, listen to me. It was a mistake. I didn't let him finish. I lunged at him, and my fist seemed to find his face on its own. I hit him with all my might, with hatred, with the pain that choked me. He fell, and I saw blood on his lip. Sarah cried out and rushed to him. She tried to lift him, but I pushed her away. Don't you dare touch him," I screamed. My friends and relatives rushed out of the room, trying to separate us. My best friend, Mark, grabbed my arm. "Daniel, stop. It's not worth it," he yelled. But I wasn't listening. I was furious. I only saw them. I saw them betraying me. I saw them destroying my life. I looked at her, at Richard, at Sarah. They were all in filth. Filth they had created themselves. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed everyone away and ran out of the banquet hall. I ran blindly in the pouring rain. I didn't know where I was running, but I knew I didn't want to go back. I ran through the streets, feeling nothing but the cold rain and the emptiness inside. My wedding suit was soaked, but I didn't care. I didn't know where I was running. I was just running from them, from myself, from all the lies that had collapsed on me in an instant. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. It was the worst nightmare I could ever have. I stopped at a small cafe where Sarah and I often had lunch. It was closed, but I saw my silhouette reflected in the window. I looked like a ghost. The wedding suit, which was supposed to be a symbol of my love and happiness, now seemed a symbol of my humiliation. I took the ring I was supposed to give Sarah out of my pocket. It was cold. I looked at it, and all the moments I considered our life together flashed through my mind. Every laugh, every hug, every kiss, it all seemed like a lie now. It was all poisoned. I started running again. I ran to the sea. I ran to where I felt free. I ran to escape this oppressive feeling that was suffocating me. I ran from memories, from pain, from betrayal. When I finally reached the sea, I fell onto the sand. I watched the waves crash against the shore. They were like my emotions, surging over me. I cried. I screamed. I punched the sand. I wanted this pain to go away. I wanted to wake up and have it all be just a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was reality. My life, which I thought was perfect, was shattered. My wife, whom I loved more than anything, had betrayed me with my stepfather. I was alone. I was broken, and I didn't know how to live anymore. I sat on the sand until morning. When the sun began to rise, I saw a fishing boat on the shore. I stood up and slowly walked towards it. I knew I had to leave. I had to start a new life. Without them, without these lies, without this pain, I had to find myself, but in another place. I got in the car. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wouldn't come back. I left my life, my memories, my pain behind. I didn't seek revenge, didn't destroy their lives, didn't create scandals. I simply left, and I knew it was the worst ending I could give them. Because now they would live with guilt, with betrayal, and they would know that I, the person who loved them both, simply disappeared. I chose freedom from this pain. I chose life, not revenge, and that was my last gift.